A'udzu billahi minasyaitonir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. All praise is due to Allah Subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one and only God. Peace and blessings be upon our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whom no other prophet will come after him. La ilaha illallah Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. There is no God to worship but Allah Subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his servant and a messenger of Allah Subhanahu wa ta'ala. As mentioned before from the previous video, when Rabi'ah bin Nasr, the Yemeni king, died, the royal power in Yemen became concentrated or reverted into the hands of Hassan bin Tubban As'ad, Abi Karib bin Malki Karib bin Zaid bin Amr the Al-Adhar. And one of the factors involving the eruption of the Abyssinian, yani Ethiopians, the transfer of the royal power from the Himyar, and the ending of their period of dominion, as Ibn Ashaq had reported, was that as soon as Hassan bin Tubban As'ad Abi Karib became king, he led an expedition with the army of Yemen, wishing to subdue the lands of the Arabs and the Persians. But when the expedition reached a certain spot in the land of Iraq, the Himyarites and the Yemenites refused to go on any further with him and wanted to return to their own homeland and families. So they approached and spoke with one of Hassan's brothers who was with him in the army, called Ammar, saying, "Kill your brother Hassan, and we will make you king over us, and you can take us back home." He agreed to their plan, and so Ammar, yani Hassan's brother, and his followers, members of the nobles, Himyarites and the Yemenites, agreed to kill Hassan, except for Dhu Ru'ayn al-Himayari. He forbade Ammar to do this and told him, "You are the ruling house of our kingdom. Do not kill your brother, and thereby dissolve the uniting bonds of our house." But Ammar rejected his words, although Dhu Ru'ayn was a leading noble of Himyarites. Hence, Dhu Ru'ayn obtained a leaf of writing material and inscribed on it a poem containing the following two verses. "Oh, who would buy sleeplessness for sleep? The one who passes his nights in a calm and peaceful state is indeed fortunate. And although Himyar has acted treacherously and faithlessly, God will hold Dhu Ru'ayn blameless." Then he sealed the piece of writing and gave it to Ammar, telling him, "Keep this document to yourself on my behalf, for there is something in it which I desire earnestly and have need of it." So Ammar did just that. When Hassan found out what his brother Ammar, Himyarites, and the Yemenites had planned, he told Ammar, "O Ammar, do not hasten my deathly fate. You can just take the royal power without using armed force." But Ammar was set on killing him and in fact did the deed. And soon after, he then returned to Yemen with his accompanying army. When Ammar bin Tubban As'ad Abi Karib established himself in Yemen, he was unable to sleep and suffered permanent insomnia. He found it impossible to sleep. It reduced him to a state of exhaustion, so he went and asked physicians, astrologers, soothsayers, and diviners what was the matter with him, saying, "I am deprived of sleep and can get no rest, and insomnia has reduced me to a state of exhaustion." One of them told him, "By God, no man has ever killed his brother or a blood relation wrongfully as you killed your brother, without losing his sleep and incurring sleeplessness." On being told this, Ammar set about killing all those members of the nobles of Himyar and the tribes of Yemen who had urged him to kill his brother Hassan, until finally he came to Dhu Ru'ayn. When Ammar expressed his intention of killing him, Dhu Ru'ayn said, "You have in your possession a document exonerating me from what you intend to do with me." When Ammar asked why, he drew attention to the document he had entrusted to him. He replied, "Fetch out the paper which I entrusted to you." The king then fetched out the paper, and lo and behold, there was written on it those 2 verses of poetry. Amr then took out the verses, read them, and realized that Dhu Ru'ayn had advised him well. Dhu Ru'ayn told him, "I forbade you from killing your brother, but you would not listen to me. So when you refused to listen to me, I left this paper with you as proof of my innocence in regards to you and exonerated me." Amr then realized that Dhu Ru'ayn had indeed advised him well and had given him wise counsel, if only he had followed it. Hence, Amr bin Tubban As'ad left him alone and did not include him among the nobles of Himyarites and the Yemenites whom he executed. But not long after, Amr bin Tubban As'ad perished and Himyar's state fell into disorder and disarray. Ibn Ishaq continued, "The affairs of Himyar fell into disorder at this point, and the people started to split up. A man of Himyar who did not stem from the royal house of Himyar, called Lakhnia Yanuf Dhu Shanatir, rose up against them, seized power over them, murdered the most prominent Yemenites, and abused the country's royal families. He was an evildoer, a most depraved man, behaving as had the people of Prophet Lut alayhi salam, ya'ni being allegedly a practitioner of sodomy." In addition to the killing and oppressions he inflicted upon them, whenever he heard that a youth from the royal family had reached the age of puberty, he would send for him and ravished him in an upper chamber he had constructed for this purpose, so that the youth could never rule after him because of dishonor. He would then go out from the upper chamber, look down to his guards and soldiers below, and place a toothpick in his mouth to show them that he had finished with the prince. Then he would release the youth and go forth and appear before the guards and the people, having completely disgraced the youth. At last, it was the turn of the last of the youths from that line of kings, Zur'ah Dhu Nawas bin Tubban As'ad Abi Karib bin Malki Karib bin Zaid bin Amr the Al-Adhar, the brother of Hassan bin Tubban As'ad Abi Karib, ya'ni the previous king I had mentioned before that was killed by his own brother Amr. Zur'ah had been only a small boy when his brother Hassan was killed, and now he had grown up into a fine, intelligent, and handsome young man. Lakhnia Yanuf Dhu Shanatir then sent for him in order for him to do what he normally had done to the princes of the royal house before him. When a messenger came to fetch him, he realized what was in store for him. So he took a slim-bladed sharp knife and placed it between his sandals and the sole of his foot. When they arrived and Lakhnia was alone with Zur'ah in the upper chamber of his, he locked the door behind them and pounced upon Zur'ah and attacked him. But Zur'ah Dhu Nawas was fast and he fought back. He then stabbed and killed Lakhnia. Then he cut off his head and placed it in the window from where he was accustomed to show himself to his guards and troops. Having placed a toothpick in Lakhnia's mouth, Zur'ah then went forth to the people. The guards called out to him, "Hey there, Dhu Nawas, fresh and moist, or all dried out?" He told them in reply to ask the head of Hell-Bent there in the window. The guards got curious with his reply, so they went off to look for their leader. And lo and behold, there was the severed head of Lakhnia Yanuf Dhu Shanatir in the window niche, with his toothpick in his mouth, which Dhu Nawas had jammed. They then caught up with Dhu Nawas and implored him to be their king, now that he had spared them from the evil tyrant, and told him, "The only fitting person to rule over us is yourself, since you have rid us of this abominable fellow." So they made him king, and the Himyarites and the Yemenites united under him. He was the last of the kings of Himyar. He became a convert to Judaism, and the Himyarites followed him in this path. He then adopted the name Yusuf, yani Joseph, and reigned for a considerable time. In Najran, there were remnants of people who followed the religion of Prophet Isa a.s., yani Jesus, son of Maryam a.s., followers of the gospel, virtuous and upright. They had a head of this same faith, called Abdullah bin at-Tamir, but its people, like all the rest of the Arabs, were originally idol worshippers. Muhammad bin Ishaq related to us from a man of the people of Najran that the people of Najran were polytheists who worshipped idols. In one of their villages near Najran, Najran being the major urban center in which the people of that region used to come together, there was a sorcerer who used to teach magic to the Najran youths at the same time when Faymiyun, yani Fimyon, took up residence in Najran. A side note, they did not call him by the name which Wahab bin Munabbih gave him, yani Fimyon, but they simply said a man took up residence there. Then he put up a tent between Najran and that village. The people of Najran began to send their boys to that sorcerer, who then taught them magic. Hence At-Tamir sent his son Abdullah bin At-Tamir together with other youths of the people of Najran. When Abdullah bin At-Tamir passed by the man in the tent, he was astonished by what he saw of the man's praying and acts of devotion, and began to sit with him and listen to him until he surrendered himself to God, acknowledged God's unity, and worshipped him. He set about asking the man about the greatest name of God, but although the man knew it, he concealed it from him with the words, "O my nephew, you will not be able to bear it. I fear you are too weak for it." He therefore refused to tell him. Meanwhile, At-Tamir, the father of Abdullah, had no idea that his son Abdullah was not going along regularly to the sorcerer just as the other youths were doing. When Abdullah saw that his master had kept the knowledge of God's greatest name from him and was afraid of his weakness, he took a number of arrows and gathered them together. Every name of God that he knew he wrote on an arrow, every name on a single arrow. When he had counted all the names, he lit a fire for this special purpose and began to throw the arrows on it one by one, until he finally reached the arrow with the greatest name of God on it. He threw it on the fire, but it immediately sprang out completely undamaged. He went up to it and grasped it, and then went to his master and informed him that he had now come to know the name his master had concealed from him. His master questioned him about it, and the youth replied that it was such and such. His master said, "How did you come to know it?" The boy told him how he had set about discovering it. He then said, "O my nephew, you have got it correctly, but keep it to yourself. Yet I don't think you actually will." Thereafter, whenever Abdullah bin At-Tamir came to Najran and met any sick person there, he would always say, "O servant of God, will you confess the unity of God and adopt my religion, so that if you do, I may invoke the blessing of God and He will cure you of your affliction?" The sick person would agree to it. Abdullah would thereupon proclaim God's unity, submit himself to God, and pray to him, so that the man was then healed. In the end, there was no sick or disabled person left in Najran who did not come to him and then followed him in his faith. Abdullah invoked God's blessing on the sick person, and he was healed. Ultimately, the news of his activity reached the king of Najran. He sent for Abdullah and accused him. "You have corrupted the people of my town and have set yourself against my religion and that of my forefathers. I shall inflict exemplary punishment on you." Abdullah replied, You have no power to do that." The king then dispatched him to a high mountain, from whose summit he was hurled down, but he fell to the ground totally unhurt. Next, the king had him consigned to some waters at Najran, deep stretches of water out of which nothing had ever emerged alive. He was thrown into them, but again came out unharmed. Having thus triumphed over the king, Abdullah bin at-Tamir told him, "By God, you will never be able to kill me until you confess the unity of God and believe in my own system of belief. But if you do that, you will be given power over me and will be able to kill me." That king thereupon confessed the unity of God and bore witness to the creed of Abdullah bin at-Tamir. He then struck him with the staff he had in his hand, striking his head with a blow of only moderate violence, thereby killing him. But the king himself then dropped dead on the spot. The people of Najran accepted the faith of Abdullah bin at-Tamir en masse, and henceforth held fast to the gospel and the law that Prophet Isa alayhi salam, yani Jesus, son of Maryam alayhi salam, had brought. This was the origin of Christianity at Najran. Ibn Ishaq related that there was a man from the people of Najran in the time of Umar bin al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, who dug up one of the ruined sites of Najran, intending to utilize it, and found the body of Abdullah bin at-Tamir inside a hollow that had filled with sand. He was in a sitting position, with his hand covering the wound from the blow to his head, holding it firmly with that hand. When his hand was lifted off, the wound began to flow with blood, but when his hand was released, he placed it back on the wound and the flow of blood ceased. On the finger of his hand was a seal ring with the inscription, "My Lord is God." A report was sent to Umar telling him the story, and he wrote back to them, "Leave him alone and replace the grave that was over him." So they did just that. Ibn Ishaq then related how Abdullah bin at-Tamir and the people of Najran adopted Christianity due to the influence of a man named Faymiun or Fimyon, a Christian from Syria. He was a man whose prayers were answered and was accompanied by a man named Saleh. They spent each Sunday in prayer, while Faymiun worked the rest of the week as a builder. He said prayers for the sick, the crippled, and the disabled, and their ills would be cured. Then one day, he and Saleh set foot in parts of the land of the Arabs, but unfortunately the Arabs swept them down, and a caravan of some Bedouins snatched them up, took them prisoners, carried them off, and finally sold them in Najran. Eventually, one of the nobles of Najran purchased Faymiun, and another man purchased Saleh. At that time, the people of Najran worshipped a tall palm tree, bowing down before it, and every year they had a festival, dressed it with fine garments and their wives' jewelries, and worshipped it for the whole day. One night, Faymiun stood up in a hut his master had allotted to him, praying, when the whole hut was filled with light, but without the presence of any lamp. Faymiun's master was astonished at the sight and filled him with wonder. He asked Faymiun about his religion and explained to him, "You people are completely in error. This date palm can neither harm nor benefit, and if I were to invoke against it to the one whom I worshipped, he would destroy it. He is God, the one without any partner." His master agreed that he would, and gathered all the people from Najran together and said, "Do that, and if you can bring that to pass, we will embrace your religion and abandon the one we used to hold." Faymiun rose up, purified himself, prayed 2 rak'ahs, meaning the act of bowing and bending which forms part of the Muslim Salah, and then invoked God's curse on the date palm. God then sent a wind that tore it up from its root and threw it flat on the ground. Then the people of Najran followed Faymion and adopted Christianity and encouraged them to follow the gospel. He instructed them in the Sharia law of the faith of Prophet Isa a.s. bin Maryam a.s. That was how Christianity came to Najran and spread in the land of the Arabs, and all this being the report of Wahab bin Munabbih concerning the people of Najran. Ibn Ishaq related that Dhu Nawas marched against them with his forces of the Himyarites and the tribes of Yemen. He gathered the people of Najran together and summoned them to the Jewish faith, offering them the choice between that and being killed. They chose to be killed, so he dug the Ukhdud, the trench, for them. According to Ibn Hisham, the Ukhdud was a long trench in the ground, like a ditch. Dhu Nawas kindled fires in it and burned some of the people there, butchered some violently with a sword, and mutilated them savagely until he had killed nearly 20,000 of them. In Surah Al-Buruj 85, the mentions of the stars, verse 4 to 11. Cursed were the people of the ditch, of fire fed with fuel, when they sat by it, and they witnessed what they were doing against the believers. And they had no fault except that they believed in Allah, the Almighty, worthy of all praise, to whom belongs the dominion of the heavens and the earth, and Allah is witness over everything. Those who persecute the believing man and women and then do not repent will certainly suffer the punishment of hell and the torment of burning. Surely those who believe and do good will have gardens under which rivers flow. That is the greatest triumph. Muhammad bin Ishaq said in his book of Sirah that the one who killed the people of the ditch was Dhu Nawas, and his name was Zur'ah. In the time of his kingdom, he was called Yusuf. He was the son of Tubban As'ad Abi Karib, who was the Tubba who invaded Al-Madinah and put the covering over the Kaaba. He kept 2 rabbis with him from the Jews of Al-Madinah. After this, some of the people of Yemen accepted Judaism at the hands of these 2 rabbis. Hisham bin Muhammad says the reason for the conquest was that Zur'ah Dhu Nawas, the last Himyarite king, was exercising his royal power in Yemen at that time, and he was also an advocate to the Jewish faith. There came to him a Jewish man called Daus from the people of Najran, who told him that the people of Najran had unjustly slain his 2 sons. He now sought Dhu Nawas's help against them. The people of Najran were Christians. Dhu Nawas was a strong supporter of the Jewish faith, so he led an expedition against the people of Najran, killing large numbers of them, roughly about 20,000 people in one morning in the ditch. The aforementioned events support the predictions of the 2 soothsayers, Sheikh and Sateh. A man from the people of Najran managed to escape. His name was Dhu Ta'laban. He escaped on a horse into the desert, and they set out after him, but they were not able to catch him. He continued traveling until he reached Caesar, the emperor of Byzantium, or Asham. He informed the king of what the Yemenis had committed and gave him a copy of the Gospels, partly burnt by the fire. Since the emperor was also a Christian, as he was, he told him what Dhu Nawas and his troops had done and asked for his aid. The emperor replied that Daus's land was very far, but that he would write a message to An-Najashi, the king of Abyssinia, who was also the same religion and whose country was closer at hand. The emperor then wrote such a message asking him to provide help and to seek revenge for those. When those Dhu Ta'laban presented Caesar's letter to the Najashi or Negus, the ruler of Abyssinia, the latter sent a force with those of 70,000 of Abyssinian Christian troops under the leadership of one of his officers named Aryat, along with another named Abraha al-Ashram, the man with a cut-off nose tip. Aryat crossed over the sea and reached the shores of Yemen, accompanied by those Dhu Ta'laban. Dhu Nawas heard of their approach, and he collected together at his side Himyar and those tribes of Yemen, owing him obedience. But they were many dissensions or disagreement of divisions in their ranks. Hence, it resulted in no real battle, and Dhu Nawas was only able to engage in a certain amount of skirmishing, and then his troops were put to flight, and Aryat overran the land with his forces. When he realized that disaster had befallen himself and his people, he turned his horse towards the sea. He whipped it onwards, and it went into the sea, bearing him through the shallows until it carried him into the deep water. He urged it onwards into the open sea, and that was the last ever seen of Zur'ah Dhu Nawas. Aryat marched across Yemen with the Abyssinian army, killing a third of its menfolk, devastating a third of the countryside, and sending back to the Najashi, yani the Negus, a third of the captured women and children. He remained there, imposing firm control over the land and reducing it to submission. The kingdom of Abyssinia remained under Christian power for 70 years. Ibn Ishaq stated, Aryat remained in control over Yemen for some years, but eventually Abraha challenged him and the Abyssinian forces split into two sides. One side moved to attack the other, but when the armies approached for battle, Abraha sent a message to Aryat suggesting that he was wrong to put the Abyssinians against one another to the ultimate damage of all, and that they should meet alone in battle, all forces then combining under the authority of the one victorious. Aryat agreed to this, but Abraha planned to act deceitfully with him. They appointed a place where the two of them were to meet for the fight, but Abraha placed in an ambush for Aryat with one of his slaves called at-Wada in a depression in the ground near the spot where they were to fight. Abraha, a short, stocky man, and he devoured Christians, whereas Aryat was tall, handsome, powerfully built, and bore a javelin, finally met at the said place. Aryat moved forward fast and lunged at Abraha with his spear, but his javelin hit him on the forehead and slit his eyebrow, eye, nose, and lip, and that was why he was known as Al-Ashram, the cleft face. Then Atwa rose out from the depression and lunged with his spear at Aryat, piercing his body and killing him. The forces of Aryat then went over to Abraha, and all Abyssinian in Yemen united under him. Wallahu alam bisawab. Ya Allah, please teach us knowledge that is beneficial to us. Let us take advantage of the knowledge that you pour onto us. Please give us knowledge, good deeds, and sincerity in our lives. May we receive mercy and guidance from you, Ya Allah. Please increase our iman and ilmu so that we can pass them down to our children, family, friends, and all our loved ones. Until my next video, inshallah, please take care and be kind to one another. Jazakumullah khairan and shukran.